Zingo TV channel 250. Please make sure to download the Zingo TV app on your Android and iOS devices, as well on your smart TVs, where it's now available. Now, before I introduce my co-host, Candid Frank, up there in Canada, and our first guest, we have Russell Baxter on. I'd like to welcome everyone who is watching and share my thoughts and prayers with you during this time. Whenever the unknown is involved, our tendency is to be a little anxious and afraid, but we at Barn Burner TV Network and Zingo TV are thrilled to have you join us during this time, and it's our honor to entertain you and have you guys join our family here. Now, up in Canada, we got my co-host, the wonderful Candid Frank. Frank, how you doing this afternoon, I should say?
Obviously, I'm wonderful.
You're wonderful. And,
obviously.
And your weekend was good.
Oh, absolutely. It was a total disappointment. The weekend, it was supposed to be beautiful weather up here, so we were all prepared to do stuff, with the assistance of nice weather.
Right.
And it rained all weekend. So now I'm looking out my window here and I see the sun shining. So if I wasn't retired, this would be a Monday to be horrified by, going back to work. The weekend, the weather is terrible. Then you go back to work Monday through Friday and the weather's beautiful.
Well, here on Long Island, we had horrible weather for most of the opening year, since January, February, and normally in April we have nice weather, but it was absolutely miserable. And this weekend was the first weekend we really had temperatures like of 65, 70 degrees. Before, I was walking around in my winter jacket, freezing to death, like I was in Canada. So I mean, I'm feeling there's something with the connection here, Frank. I'm feeling it. That Canadian vibe is coming through real strong. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think you should start maybe talking to some sort of a wizard or witch to get rid of that Canadian curse that seems to be haunting you.
Oh no, it's not a curse. I welcome it.
It's pretty nice here, and I'd like to also wish my girlfriend's aunt, who's suffering from COVID, and she's in real trouble right now. And if people could put out good thoughts for her, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, our person.
But it's on my mind. We're just hearing this kind of stuff now. It doesn't get better every time we hear from people. So I'm sure we're just joining a whole lot of other people that have been feeling the same thing. So I hope everybody's safe out there, just like you. I want to echo those words. And for those of you that are struggling, find the strength. And for those of you that are aware of somebody who's struggling, help them find the strength.
Amen.
Share your strength with them. That's what we're all about.
Amen. Thank you, Frank. Well, we have our first guest here. We have Russell Baxter, former ESPN researcher, NFL Countdown and NFL Prime researcher, was Chris Berman's right-hand man. He's the most knowledgeable football man on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think there's anything Russell doesn't know about the NFL. One of the nicest guys, one of the most knowledgeable guys. You can find him on Twitter at Bax Football Guru and at ProFootballGuru.com, where he writes, and his articles are, I would say impressive would be an understatement. Russell, how you doing up there in Connecticut today?
Well, I don't know. So you tell me I know where I'm just kidding. Thank you very, very kind words, Mark. I really, really appreciate that. And that introduction is living proof that PayPal works. So
absolutely.
Obviously you got my $5.95 payment for that introduction. So
yeah.
And by the way, I work with Mark at ESPN as well, and he certainly knows his stuff as well. So going to be a lot of fun. And Mark and I have talked football for many, many years. And then again, I've also watched Mark's pain when it comes to a certain football team that wears green, and it's not the Eagles or the Packers.
Yeah, well, we won't get to that right now, as as the history of the Jets is not on call for today. But talking about the Jets and their only Super Bowl win came against Don Shula. We just heard that he passed at age 90, the NFL all-time head coach as far as wins. What are your thoughts on Don Shula?
Well, I got an opportunity to meet him very, very briefly at a Pro Bowl with obviously with Chris Berman when I was at ESPN, and he was one of the honorary coaches with Andy Reid. Talk about a pairing and so on. And it's just amazing. I think if I remember right, it was like that 55-52 game in Hawaii, and
Wow.
it was just, it was what it was and so on. But I got a chance to meet him, and what can you say about? You can't talk football history without Don Shula. 7 years with the Colts, and then think about how amazing the job was that he did with Miami, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
He took over in 1970. They were only a team that had been formed in 1966.
Mm-hmm.
He took them to the playoffs the first year. In fact, took them to the playoffs. What was it? His 5 years there.
Yep. 70, 71, 72, 3 straight Super Bowls. Yep.
74, the 3 straight Super Bowl appearances. In 74, they lost the
Raiders
game.
Yep.
75, they were a 10-4 team, if I remember right, but they lost on a tiebreaker to the Colts.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the AFC East title, when there weren't as many playoff teams.
Yep.
I want to say he's maybe hit two losing seasons.
Two losing seasons. Yep.
More wins than anyone else. Not involved in some of the. I'm in the midst, to be honest with you, writing a piece about him for Spin Zone, and I think about 2 moments: being carried off the field at the Coliseum after 17-0, and then being carried off the field at the Vet when he set the new record for most wins by a head coach. I believe in 1993, if I remember right, I think Doug Peterson was his quarterback that day when they beat the Eagles. And, 1995 was his last year. They were a playoff team. They lost to the Bills, which was really, really ironic because if you remember from 1970 to 1979, 10 seasons, the Miami Dolphins beat the Buffalo Bills in every game.
Yep.
20 consecutive, which I believe is still the record for most wins over one opponent. So don't feel bad, Buffalo, that you're like 35-5 versus the Patriots since Bill Belichick. Okay, you've had worse stretches and so on. So, but I mean, you think of the impact, you think of the discipline, you think of, how he adapted his styles as a head coach. He always worked around his personnel. He goes from Bob Greasy and 2,000-yard rushers in 1972 and a running game, and Bob Greasy barely throwing the ball in 2 Super Bowls, and then finding an electrifying passer in Dan Marino with 48 touchdown passes in 1984. But again, the championship eluded him after those consecutive Super Bowl wins. He went, and think about this: he took the Dolphins to the Super Bowl in '82 during the strike shortened season, which was Woodley as the starter.
Yep.
And 2 years later, it was Marino. Marino actually took over midseason in '83.
Yep.
So you think about just football history when it comes. Everybody asked if he's on Mount Rushmore when it comes to the coaches, and it's hard to keep him off there. I mean, I'm almost thinking it's him and Vince Lombardi and Bill Belichick and maybe Chuck Noll. As I said, they got to. Maybe Mark, you can do something about this. You have some influence. We can stop doing the Mount Rushmore. Can we start doing stuff like, maybe the Magnificent Seven? Just or the Dirty Dozen. It would make it easier for us trying to narrow down our choices.
We got Jim Brown already if we do the Dirty Dozen. But
that's very, very well done.
Yeah, the Towering Inferno. I'll never forget that. He disappeared. That was OJ actually.
That was OJ.
Yeah. Before I introduce you to Candid Frank up there in Canada, it was a CFL expert. I got one more question for you on Shula, because you mentioned about Marino. Okay, now Marino takes over 83. They have a bad loss to the Seahawks in the playoffs, and then in 85, you talk about the Bills. The Patriots had not won in Miami since in the AFL. Then they win in the championship game. That denies us of the Bears-Dolphins rematch that everyone wanted. Wound up following, no road playoff wins with Marino, 5 straight road losses in the playoffs to end his career. Do you think that maybe gives a little bit takes a little bit away from his head coaching career?
I don't think so, but what it does show you is and it happened to Bill Belichick. It happened to Bill Belichick in 2007. And, think about some of the people, I think, get bored with the adage of defense wins championships. Okay. You shouldn't get bored by that because it's actually true. There's a reason the 12 highest scoring teams in NFL history of points in the season don't have a championship.
Mhm.
There's a reason no player has led the league in passing yards and never won the Super Bowl the same season. And I think that infatuation with the lack of balance, you have to have balance. Okay. You know who they should put on Mount Rushmore? Mr. Miyagi. Okay. Because Mr. Miyagi was the greatest offensive coordinator as far as I'm concerned, because he's balanced. And how many times do we have to say, look at Kansas? In fact, just modernize it, Mark. Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes throwing 50 touchdown passes.
Mhm.
They also gave up 421 points last year.
Right.
This year, they actually gave up fewer points than the San Francisco 49ers.
Well,
Knock that off, but to 308. Okay. Defense started to play lights out the second. That's as big a reason. That's why Patrick Mahomes can have kind of a subpar 3 quarters in the Super Bowl.
right.
You can't make this a one-man game. It never has worked. History shows it. And I think even Bill Belichick, when Brady's throwing 50 touchdown passes in the Super Bowl, when it was all said and done, they couldn't block the Giants' defensive line. They couldn't stop the Giants from taking one of my favorite moments of that Super Bowl.
Yep.
The Giants owned the football for 9 minutes and 59 seconds of the quarter when they got the ball. They shortened the game before the Patriots even got on the field. And what happened? They scored a season low 14 points. Listen, there's a couple ways to do this. Okay. You can either have a great defense or you can have a ball control offense that keeps the other offense off the field.
I'd like to introduce you, Russell, to Candid Frank up in Canada. Frank's covers the CFL. He's been in business for a long time. Frank, this is Russell Baxter. I know you got some questions about the Cowboys.
Hi, Russell. How you doing?
I'm great. I have to do this. It's just the punster ends me. So I'm looking at Candid on camera.
Yep.
Okay.
Candid camera.
Candid camera. Okay. I had to throw that out there. It's a public service.
Well, you see, when I was looking for a name for the show that I was doing, because I love the CFL, I wanted to make it the initial CFL. So the F was easy, Frank. That was easy.
Right.
The L was kind of easy, and I came up with it and went live. Okay, so what do I do first? So it's sort of it's an oxymoron in my opinion. Candid Frank Live. So CFL. Anyway.
I like it.
I digress. But I've been able to use it in a lot of shows that I do. But before we waxed on and waxed off, that was a
very well done.
Very good.
Well done.
Very good.
Important question, Russell. How far does the $5 Canadian go? Because I could use some support too. I was just wondering, just something I'm wondering about. Seriously, though, Don Shula up here in Canada, we love the NFL here. As a country, we love the NFL. The NFL has been up here, forever. The biggest thing that made the NFL more popular in Canada were people like Don Shula, Tom Landry. They were the names that at least my generation and a little older, I guess, or a little younger. Those are the guys that we think about when we think about the NFL. One wonders whether a Dan Marino would be a Dan Marino or Bob Greasy would be a Bob Greasy without, Don Shula. Needless to say, Mike Shula would be anything without Don Shula. But that's another story.
That's the most factual thing. Correct. Everything else is opinion. That's fact. So.
Right.
So
my question is, looking at the Cowboys, top offense. You were just talking about how defenses, they win championships. I disagree with that just a tad. We can talk about that another time, but I just happen to think that offense, everybody, including the NFL, sports in general, are pushing offense. So eventually, if you push offense hard enough, you'll be pushing down on defense. It's like protecting the quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm.
That will help the defense. But anyway, looking at that team, the Cowboys, a great offense. did Dak Prescott, is he why the team is that good offensively, or is the team the reason why he's as good as he is statistically? And of course, now with Dalton gone, what's the story there?
Well, from what I'm gathering, remember Andy Dalton went to school at Texas Tech. So that I think was an appeal for him to go there. I thought common sense, at least to me, was Jacksonville for Andy Dalton. Okay. Jay Gruden was his offensive coordinator with Cincinnati for 3 years. Tyler Eifert signed there as a free agent. So to me, NFL free agency, I refer to as the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Okay. Just kind of connect the dots and see who's going where and so on. Watching Dak Prescott evolve into a more complete quarterback has been really impressive. But I think the reason the Cowboys struggled last year was, and I'll go back to their defense. Their defense, which during the second half of 2018, with the young players that they had, the young linebacking combination, Van Der Esch and, Jason Smith and so on, and the veteran Sean Lee and DeMarcus Lawrence at the pass rush. I saw them last year. A prime example, a Sunday night game against Minnesota, where they lose a 28-24 game. A game earlier in the season against the Jets where they were overwhelmed in the first half and gave up a bunch of points and so on. This is a Cowboys team that you go back to 2014, and it's really the strength of the team is the offensive line. Ron Smith and Andrew Frederick and Zach Martin and so on. And, yes, there's 2 ways to do this. Defense is great, but they used their offensive line, Frank, for a number of years to hide their defense, okay, by keeping their defense off the field. As their defense start to evolve in 2018, I think there were a lot of people who were very disappointed with the way it came up last year, and just, in crucial situations, especially in the secondary, just very, very disappointing. And I know Van Der Esch was hurt a little last year and so on. So, but Prescott to me is a guy who started out as a different quarterback and has evolved into a more complete quarterback, especially as a passer. And I'm really going to be curious to see them in the 3 wide receiver set this year, when they've got Amari Cooper and they've got Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb, who they're obviously very high on. And, Jason Witten's not there anymore. So maybe the tight end is a little more of a factor. And Ezekiel Elliott, listen, if you don't think he's the best back in the league, he's in the top 3, no matter which way you slice it. So that is an exciting offense. And I would expect, knowing Mike McCarthy's reputation, that they might de-emphasize the run a little more and throw even more. I think that was one of the things that wound up being costly for him in Green Bay, was that lack of balance. Aaron Rodgers had to carry the show, and when Aaron Rodgers got hurt, they weren't able to adjust. When you build your team around one person, like the Colts did for years in Peyton Manning's latter years, and then he disappears in 2011, it adds up to 2-14.
Mm-hmm.
They do, and they will, I suppose, change the way they play. What happens in New England?
Oh. Well, besides, I heard the quarterback left.
Rumors, Russell.
But do you know what was really interesting about the offseason for New England? Jamie Collins is gone. Kyle Van Noy is gone. They had, they traded Deron Harmon to the Lions. I think the Lions have 3 former Patriots, either via trades and free agency. And the Dolphins have 3 former Patriots, Landon Roberts and so on. So everybody went to all the assistant coaches. So it was more than just Brady leaving, which obviously is enormous. I mean, it's unprecedented. I can't think of well, first off, we've only had free agency since 1993. So to go back in the years and compare this, but to play for a team for 20 years and then go join another team and then somehow manage, accidentally to get Rob Gronkowski to come out of retirement retirement.
I thought Vince McMahon was involved in that, though, Russell.
Well, let's think of that. Rob Gronkowski went to the WWE. Doesn't it almost sound like a WWE?
It does. It does. You're going to
Move.
break out of the wall,
Right.
come in his Tampa Bay uniform, run on the field, maybe body slam somebody, and he's back.
It was like Andre the Giant turned his back on Hulk Hogan and we a 3, okay?
Bobby the Brain Heenan is somewhere around there, too. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I just thought that was really interesting, the massive amount of defections that went on with New England and so on. And, they, nickel and dime their way through free agency and relying on the draft. And, here's the problem, though. We've seen them without Brady. We saw it in 2008, okay? It's not like they win the Super Bowl every year, but to dismiss them I think is dangerous. Now, I will say something about their defense, which obviously last year was off to a torrid start. That's a back-end defense. Gilmore and McCourty and some of the other defensive backs they got. And I think losing Van Noy and Collins, who were playmakers and very resourceful, I hope they feel good about their front seven, because think about it. Baltimore exposed them on that Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They couldn't get after Deshaun Watson, and he riddled their secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then Derrick Henry.
Yeah, beat him up.
The runaway refrigerator down the ramp. Okay. Just tore. I mean, to me, New England, that loss to the Dolphins at home, down the stretch, to use a boxing term, Mark and Frank, they look like a shot fighter. Mm-hmm. They lined up against Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So they were at home, and they just looked spent. They just looked emotionally spent. And, but how do you dismiss them? 19 straight winning seasons, second streak in NFL history, 11 straight playoff appearances, which has never been done, 11 straight divisional titles. Mm-hmm. Old record was 7, okay, by the Rams in the 70s. Okay, so how do you dismiss? And I'd have to see New England finish with a couple of straight subpar seasons to dismiss even the dynasty being over. Dynasty doesn't mean winning 20 straight championships. It means being in the mix and mixing in championships. That's why, to me, I always look at the 70 Steelers as the greatest team in NFL history, because they had an 8-year run, which was unprecedented. But as far as the greatest dynasty, I think it's New England, and it tops to me, which was the second greatest, was the Niners from the 80s and most of the 90s. That was an amazing run, and they did it with 2 different quarterbacks and 2 different coaches. And now New England's going to, maybe not a different coach, but they're certainly going to be doing it with a different quarterback.
Before I get to my question about Brady, one thing I thought was interesting in the playoffs, and you and me love these weird stats, Tannehill won consecutive playoff games without reaching 100 yards.
Right.
The first quarterback to do that since Terry Bradshaw in the 74 championship game against the Raiders, and a Super Bowl against the Vikings. And then, Henry becomes first player in NFL history to rush for 180 yards in 3 straight games. Never been done. I thought those are 2 great stats. Brady leaves the AFC East, which was, women and children first, and goes to the NFC South. What do you think? A totally different division, very good quarterbacks, very good head coaches. How do you think he'll do?
That was very well done. You did a women and children's first reference.
There you go.
You also somehow mixed in the Titans. Okay.
Hey.
That was well done.
We're short on time here, Russell. I got to do everything.
What's really ironic about the way New England bowed out last year was the fact that that's how they won their 6th Super Bowl. Okay. Mm-hmm. They were struggling down the stretch. They lost to Miami and Pittsburgh. Okay. And Miami, I know everybody talks about the lateral and Rob Gronkowski being out of position and all that stuff at the end of the game, the Miami Miracle and all that stuff. But if I remember right, Miami had like $189 on the ground, something like that. Mm-hmm. Following week, Pittsburgh and Jalen Samuels had $140 something on the ground. So how do you counteract that if your defense isn't that great? You run for 150 plus yards in 3 straight playoff games, which is what they did against the Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Rams. They played. Oh, who won that Super Bowl? Was it Bill Belichick? Was it Tom Brady? Mm-hmm. Not the Dante Scarnecchia. and what he did with the offensive line throughout the season and especially in the playoffs. So they got it handed to them the same way they handed it to the 3 playoff teams in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to have to try and deal with that when it comes to other teams in their division. Buffalo wants to run the football. They've got Devin Singletary. Okay. Frank Gore's not been re-signed, but who knows where Frank Gore's going to.
Yeah, he might be at the retirement home. I mean, he's been around for that long.
Right. What did the Jets do this offseason? They stressed the offensive line in free agency. They stressed it in the draft. They have Le'Veon Bell. Okay. No, it's funny. Everybody, the other 3 teams in the AFC East, seeing what happened in New England the second half of the year, are going to do the damnedest to keep Tom Brady off the field. That's right. He's not there anymore. And that would have been the whole goal to begin with. They just want to keep New England's offense off the field and test that defense and shorten the game. And when you shorten the game like that, it's a little tighter. We saw, again, it's the oldest trick in the book, but it works. And, that Miami, we saw what Miami can do and what they did in terms of, they traded for Matt Breida. They signed a Jordan Howard. Remember who led the lead? Do you remember who led Miami in rushing last year?
Yes, Ryan Fitzpatrick.
First,
Ryan Fitzpatrick. The lowest total ever in NFL history.
My goodness. And, no reps. And they stressed their offensive line as well. So every coach in the league will tell you, you build your team to beat the other teams in the division. That's always the goal. Now, of course, it's been 20 years since
right.
do that consistently to the New England Patriots, but we shall see. I think it's going to be a very interesting season once it starts.
Real quick before we let you go, I know you're a busy guy. But does Brady make the playoffs with Tampa Bay?
I don't know. I think a lot depends on if their defense, and Todd Bowles played pretty well the last 6 games of the year, and that was even with Jameis Winston.
All over the place.
Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, Jameis. What did Jameis have last year? He had what?
30.
7 pick sixes.
7. Yeah. NFL record.
Okay. I mean, there are bookies that don't have 7. Okay. So, I'll give you a stat. You'll enjoy this. Okay. I'm not doing this to fashion a stat, but I'm doing this for Tom Brady since 2009. And the reason I'm doing that, Mark, is remember 2008, he missed the vast majority of the season.
Right.
Okay. From 2009 to 2019, Tom Brady played 172 regular season games and turned over the ball 112 times. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Jameis Winston in his career played 72 games and turned over the ball 111 times.
Yeah.
Now, Tampa Bay has led the league in turnovers the last 2 years. That hasn't happened since the Rams of the early 2000s, when I think they did it 3 years in a row.
Right.
Able to overcome that a couple of times. And so, by the way, Tampa Bay has the 2nd longest playoff drought in the league.
Wow.
Browns.
Wow.
They've been there since John Gruden won the NFC South with a 9-7 record.
That's right.
So,
most of the Giants, right?
I think what's encouraging about Tampa Bay is they didn't do a lot in free agency other than Brady and Gronkowski. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but they didn't bring in a whole slew of players. Okay. They're building on what their defense did late last year with Jason Pierre-Paul, what Shaquille Barrett did, leading the league in sacks, what Ndamukong Suh. They got Levante David. They got Devin White, who was the 5th pick in the draft. If their secondary can play a little better. Yeah. And listen, we have 7 playoff teams in each conference now. So getting to the playoffs, it's a tad easier.
Right. Thank you, Russell Baxter. You can find him at Baxter Football Guru on Twitter, profootballguru.com on the World Wide Web. Russell, always great to have you. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy, and God bless you. Frank, I know you enjoy Russell. He's a very creative guy, to say the least. But thank you, Russell.
It was nice being on with both of you. Thanks, Frank. It was a lot of fun talking to you and so on. I'd love to hear your thoughts more on the CFL. I fell in love with the CFL during the strike season in '82 when NBC was showing the games, and of course ESPN used to show them as well, and so on. So It was great being on with you and Mark. Anytime.
God bless, Russell.
It would have been great to hear Jared Stidham's stat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Over the long
I'll be
haul.
really curious about him as well. Hey, listen, I give Jared Stidham credit. He got into a game last year against the Jets and promptly threw a touchdown pass.
He did.
Yes, he
Jamal
did.
Adams, though,
But we won't bring up who caught that touchdown pass and
Jamal Adams,
returned it for a touchdown. So,
Right.
Right.
Mark, be well. Take care of yourself. God bless you. Okay.
Nice seeing you. Thank you very much. So, Frank, we move on into other sports, but the NFL, to me, with everything that's going on, in the offseason, the draft, and 55 million people watching the draft, it's you see the impact that the NFL has overall. I would love for you guys to obviously talk about the CFL and the NFL, because I was looking up some of the guys that made, that had success in the NFL and had success in the CFL. There were a couple names on there I had forgotten about. You tell me if you remember this. Remember Andre Rison played one season for Memphis. There was actually a Memphis team in the CFL. All right.
That's right.
Joe Horn played in the CFL for a little while. Fred Biletnikoff finished his career in the CFL. You had Chad Ochocinco. Obviously, he went up there more of a publicity stunt after his career was over. Wasn't really productive. Ricky Williams, a guy that went to the CFL. Joe Theismann, Joe Kapp. Any guys you remember at NFL success that the average fan wouldn't remember?
Oh my goodness. You've mentioned all, but there's one, the LA quarterback that went to Montreal.
Ferragamo?
Ferragamo, yes, thank you. He went there and he had a semi good career. One thing that if you want to know from a CFL perspective, NFL players who have had careers, good ones in the NFL, for the most part, have not ever had a real good career in the CFL after that. They've not followed up the NFL career with a good CFL career. There's I guess, while the obvious is that they're two different games because of the motion, because of the 3 downs and all that kind of stuff. There's also some other, there's other things that come up from it. The waggle, which is something that receivers have to get used to. It's all about timing. It's not like Americans don't understand the Canadian Football League, because all one has to do is look at college football, and you'll get a better idea of what the CFL is like, because a lot of the rules are kind of similar between the two. So it's not like Americans lack the ability to understand, but I think that's why when a college player goes from college to NFL, it seems like he forgets what was going on. I don't know if I'm making any sense. It's just difficult for them to make that transition. Just very difficult. What is possible and what does happen is that a lot of successful Canadian Football League players have used that success, and they have been able to use that experience to their advantage in the NFL. The biggest advantage, I don't really, this is not, just for plain facts, not for political reasons. So anybody who thinks this is all political, it has nothing to do with politics. Very simply, in Canada, we had an opportunity to bring in Black football players.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big pool of talent that wasn't, taken advantage of to the fullest extent. It grew from football players to football quarterbacks. Warren Moon is the primary example of, I believe, why the NFL finally decided maybe Black African Americans can be quarterbacks. He came up there after being in Edmonton here in the CFL, having all kinds of success. He is one of the primary men who opened the door for African American quarterbacks. He's to that credit. And then it gets even to the point where we have coaches, and we had a commissioner who was African American. So the Canadian Football League has always been in we talk about it. Adversity is one thing, but diversity is another. And Canada is well known for that. And our league benefited a lot from that little bit of not being given a chance, those players I referred to being given a chance in the Canadian Football League. And that in turn helped make the league better. And I think it helped make down the road, it helped make football better. So that is the first thing that for me, that's at the root of the difference, the historical difference between the two. Here in Canada, as you may or may not know, in baseball, the greatest baseball player of all time began his career in Montreal, in Canada, and became, the best player in baseball in the United States. And he was the first African-American baseball player, as you know. And it's just a great thing that when people are given an opportunity, they can be prolific. Stepping away from the racial part of it, the same is true for players in the Canadian Football League. They play in college, they're really good, they're not drafted, they're not given a chance in the NFL. They come to the Canadian Football League almost with a chip on their shoulder. So a lot of the Canadian Football League American players are playing with kind of a chip on their shoulder. Not a bad one, a good motivator. So to me, that's the difference between the Canadian Football League. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is their appreciation of the fans and being able to continue playing under the bright light makes them very appreciative. And it turns American football players in this country into really nice people. Not that they're not nice in the US, don't get me wrong, but it gives them an extra little bit of appreciation for playing football still. And so that's kind of the advantage that we have. And that's how I'll define the difference, at least motivationally speaking, for Canadian Football League and versus the NFL.
A couple of other players. I know Jeff Garcia had success in the CFL before joining the NFL, won a couple of division titles with the 49ers. A very athletic quarterback, could get outside the pocket, had a great arm. Brandon Brown, our cornerback, played for the Vikings a couple of times, Pro Bowler. Cameron Wake, another Pro Bowler, joined, it was a CFL before coming to the Miami Dolphins. So you're right. Most of the time it's CFL guys going to the NFL and having success. And the type of athlete in the CFL that flourishes gets their opportunity there. And you're right, it's all about opportunity. You mentioned Jackie Robinson, and him and Rachel loved Montreal. They were treated so well up there. They called it their second home. Jackie Robinson, obviously one of my heroes. I've written about him a bunch of times. I think probably had the biggest impact on professional sports, along with Muhammad Ali, I think, of any athlete in the 20th century. So, you can't ask for more than just to be given an opportunity. And to me, I always looked at the CFL as representing that. There were no politics involved. There was no, this or that, or what you look like, or whatever, what position you played. It was, can you play? We'll give you a chance. And that's all anybody can ask for. In today's
before you go to the extent that I want to make sure people understand this, because I have an opinion on this, and it's not that they were. I'm going to be very careful how I say this because I want to make sure I say it right. Mm-hmm. It's not that we in Canada are better people than Americans. Okay, we had a different motivation too. It's not just because we're nicer than Americans. Oh, we're so much nicer than Americans. It was also a financially good idea to use these players that are this talented. You have Americans already, so what difference does it make to make that extra step that they're black or they're white? It didn't matter. It was beneficial. This is just my way of saying, doing this kind of thing, where giving people opportunity can be beneficial for you. It isn't just about helping them. It's about helping yourself. In our case, Canada is a great example, the Canadian Football League, where if you open things up, it makes you better. So that's why we're, inclusion is one of the primary things that we do. We have the benefit of learning from the big country below us, known as America. So, we deal with things. We're lucky because we can look at how you do things and then we get a second chance to do it a different way. So I don't want people in America to think that Canadians think we're much better than Americans. We're not. We're much like Americans, but we have what I'll call a second sober thought.
Thank you for clarifying that, Frank. I hope nobody took it that way. I certainly did.
No, I don't want to give that impression.
Thank you. I look at the CFL though. The AFL learned those lessons before the NFL did, and they introduced a lot of those changes. A lot of the athletes from smaller colleges, small black colleges, they got their opportunity in the AFL and opened up. Same thing with the National League. National League for a long time dominated the American League because they allowed a lot of Hispanics, a lot of African Americans, and they were able to appreciate their talent a little bit more. Like you said, it's not just about getting what being bad people or why it happened. It ultimately they saw that their ignorance and their holding back other people from playing really had nothing to do with anything other than what they liked or disliked. And anyone who has talent deserves to have a shot to play. And that's ultimately what matters, that nobody gets left behind. Nobody gets disregarded because of what they believe, because of their faith, because of their preferences or anything like that, that we all are given the same opportunity. So I'm glad that we're able to learn those lessons over time.
Isn't that the beauty of sport?
Looking at news of the day from some of the other sports that are going on over the weekend, Frank, I don't know if you saw this. I hope I get his first name right, but the world's strongest man in 2018, Hafnor Bjornsson, he set the world record for a deadlift. You get this? 1,104 pounds. I know, I only could do about 850 on a good day, but I got a little bit to go before I catch up to this guy. Broke a world record of 1,102 by Eddie Hall in 2016. Is it something about the weather up there that makes the Icelandics a little more stronger?
It's just probably just genes and actually, they spend a lot of time indoors. So, they're good at hockey. All kidding aside, they have a history.
Mm-hmm.
They have a history of powerlifting. It's no different than us. Every country, there's countries that we define as soccer countries, rugby countries, baseball countries, football countries, basketball countries. And that's people, and I guess in that kind of environment, gravitate to what's been good for them in the past. And they have a history of, and that deadlift, I couldn't deadlift that many grams, if you know what that is. So I just,
Yeah, the neighbors around here are getting kind of mad when I kept lifting up their cars, but they at least they could get under them and do some oil changes. But
and in case nobody figured out what he just said, that 1,104 pounds is the weight of a car.
Unbelievable.
Small car, not a big car. But
what I love is the name of the gym that he did it at, Thor's Power Gym. Okay, me and my fiance talk about when we get dogs and when sadly Sammy's a little bit older, so he's kind of ending the twilight years. So when we get dogs again, we're going to name them Usted and Ragnar because if you say those names to your dog, people kind of tend to look around and what the heck, they pay attention to those types of manly, fearful names. And Thor's Power Gym in Iceland, if you're going to break a deadlift record, that's the place to do it, don't you think?
Yeah, no. Hey, doing it there, I think it's appropriate.
Absolutely.
In Iceland, in ice country.
Mm-hmm. Keeping with power guys, George Laraque, remember him, NHL tough guy, just announced that he had the COVID-19 virus. He was preparing for a marathon, I believe. And, Laraque, big guy, a fighter. I remember him as one of the first real. He could fight. He had a little different part about his game, but as far as the guys like I thought of Clark Gillies and Terry O'Reilly, Laraque was a little bit different type of fighter, but he definitely was one of the tough guys. What do you remember about Laraque?
Well, I remember that he was at a time the best fighter in the National Hockey League and most feared. And he was one of the guys that my recollection is a lot of players did not want to fight. They
don't want to fight him, nope.
They did not want to fight him. And it was, the body language said it all, no matter how hard you tried to mask it. The old, Look for somebody. Where is somebody? There's got to be somebody else here I can go grab. Yeah, it was a real dance when a fight broke out, or when tensions got higher when Larac was on the ice.
Yeah, I know. It's funny because most people don't remember the NHL of the